Welcome to Terror in Tandem, a podcast about finding entertainment in the macabre. Hosted by the knowledgeable and lovable Laura and Richard Mathiasen. Each episode, we discuss the horror genre, from books to film to TV and beyond. And sometimes, even from the beyond. You can find us online at terrorintandem.com and on Instagram at terrorintandem.
I think we should just call it meta now.
Gross. And, you know, I did want to say, check out that Instagram. It's curated and created and everythinged by beloved co-host Laura, and it's awesome. I have no ability to do any of those things, and I'm always just so impressed. Yeah,
I gotta get... we need an assistant.
It's tough. It's just a lot of work.
I mean, it's just we do this out of the kindness of our heart.
Yeah, the single heart that we share that lives in a chamber.
In a free moment between managing all of our properties and
which takes a
working
lot of time.
Our jobs.
Which we do for fun because we don't need the money, obviously.
We do. What I'm trying to say that we do need the money.
Right.
We can't keep pretending.
Please give us money.
That we don't need help with going on with this.
Listen,
pursuit.
If just everyone in the entire world gave us $1, we'd be set.
Actually, I just want to. There was a story about this teacher. So this teacher went on TikTok to talk about how his students have a bill due for their school lunches.
Wow.
And he asked everybody watching if they could send $1 and it would go directly to pay off the debts of these, kids in school. And he was just hoping to get a few $100s. I think the total he needed was like $2,700, something like that. He got like hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Wow.
And so he paid off all the
It's a
school
lot of
debt.
Salisbury steaks.
Yeah. Or Square Pizza.
Yeah.
He paid off the debts of the students in his school and then shared the rest with other schools within like the community and surrounding communities.
That's lovely.
It's highlighting a bigger problem though.
Yeah. It's hard for me to get fully happy about a story like that because, I don't think you should have to go on social media to beg for money to pay for lunch debt for middle school students. That is a sentence that is more horrifying than anything we'll ever talk about on this podcast.
Well, except today's episode.
Well, what do you want to talk about today?
I want to talk about feminism in horror. Feminist horror.
I think that's a great idea, and I fully support it.
It doesn't matter what you think. We're doing it.
Love it.
So I know that there is a lot of working definitions of what feminism is, what some of the mainstays and ideals of feminism are. I think it really is ultimately defined by the female on what she believes to be, like a feminist approach to life or their own experiences.
Sure.
But I think we should just specifically talk about feminist horror and sort of how that is understood or defined by using many of the examples that we've both put together.
Absolutely. I mean, like most schools of criticism or ideologies, there are a few things that I think can be universally agreed upon, but it is also highly subjective to the experience of the person, to the time period in which they're living, the society in which they're living. It's all shaped by that. So, yeah, we're going to be looking at feminism in horror, which, in my opinion, has always been a bit ahead of the curve in terms of female representation. Not always.
It's believed that horror is one of the most feminist genres of film.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Absolutely.
So one of my favorite sort of summations of feminism in horror is when a horror film doesn't hesitate to show the fear that women experience on a daily basis. That's feminist horror.
Mm-hmm.
When women explore their ever-changing bodies and intricate emotions, and how we as women are constantly fighting for our lives in like emotionally, spiritual, and like literal ways, that's feminist horror. It's really about showing the nuances of being a woman.
Sure. I would say, one criteria that I put on films when I'm judging them through a feminist point of view is authenticity. Do the female characters not only, there are some simple things to look out for, like the Bechdel test, and are there female characters? Are they driving the action of the film? Do they have agency? But also, is there authenticity? Do the female characters speak like women, or do they speak like a man might imagine they speak? I think that's pretty easy for us to suss out. And do they fall into typical tropes that you might see in movies with a lot of women in them?
Well, there's a book by Carol Clover called Men, Women, and Chainsaws, and she discusses the trope of the final girl, which we've discussed in previous episodes.
Mm-hmm.
And specifically in relationship to being the spectator, she highlights that horror films featuring the final girl allow the audience to identify with the women being pursued. And although most horror films, specifically the slasher genre, it's the audience, typically the male, the audience sees a male typically attacking females, and then they ultimately witness the female surviving in the end. And if the audience is seeing and experiencing the fear from the victim who's female, this is a way for the authenticity that you just mentioned to carry over into the viewer, whether male or female, and they can get insight into that female experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I would judge it on a case-by-case basis, because not all final girls are created equal. There are some, I think, that maybe get to the end of their story because of luck or the sacrifice of others. And then there are others who take action, into their own hands, like your Ellen Ripley's from Alien,
or Laurie Strode.
Your Laurie Strodes, who take control, who kick ass.
Nancy Thompson.
Exactly. Speaking of, you just rattled off a couple of my ultimate feminist heroes in horror. So we've got Laurie Strode from Halloween. And, why? Why do we consider her a feminist hero? Is because she fights back.
Yeah.
She doesn't spend the entire time running and hiding. She protects the weak, the children, Tommy Doyle and the other kid. She fights back against a seemingly unkillable monster. And then if you want to examine it through the sequels later on and the legacy sequels, she seemingly spends her entire life preparing for a final confrontation that she wins.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty awesome. You mentioned briefly Nancy Thompson, played by Heather Langenkamp in Nightmare on Elm Street. Now, what makes her, in your opinion, a feminist hero?
Well, that she overcomes all of the obstacles put in front of her, and no male in her life does anything to help.
Absolutely.
Actually becomes hindrances.
They are, in my opinion, she's one of the ultimate feminist heroes in horror, because she overcomes both the physicality of Freddy Krueger, subverting the trope that, women are too weak to fight men physically. She also is gaslit to fucking oblivion throughout the entire movie by her parents, her friends, her Glenn, who she asks one thing of Glenn: don't fall asleep.
Yep.
And Glenn falls asleep and gets eaten by his bed. I mean, Glenn,
she realizes
you had one
that
fucking job to do, Glenn. You had one job to do.
The movie sort of places these men in caregiver roles,
well, it's
caretaker
like
roles,
giving them ultimate numbers of opportunities to do the right thing, and then watching them fuck all of them
but
up.
she only has herself to rely on.
Yeah.
And
running up the marshmallow stairs.
Yes. Oh man, that movie is scary.
Yeah.
All of them are in their own way.
But yeah, you're right. I mean, she fights against all angles in that movie and still prevails, sort of. I mean, the ending is a little it's a little wild.
Yeah. So, what else?
Well, one other woman I want to bring up that may not be considered because she's not a final girl is Marion Crane. Speaking of Jamie Lee Curtis, played by her mother, Janet Leigh, in Psycho.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Marion Crane very famously dies not long into the movie. But up until that point, let's think about who she is. She's a woman who had a shitty, sleazy boss that she just couldn't take any more from. So she robs him blind and goes on the run. And she is going to start a new life. She's staying at a hotel. She's alone. She's got all this money. It doesn't end well for her. But her death is the catalyst for the downfall of Norman Bates. It's what causes, the investigation. It's what causes people to look into the Bates Motel. And it's what causes him to get caught in the end. So Marion Crane does have her revenge from beyond the grave. But in 1960, to have this beautiful, sexually active woman, robbing her employer and traveling alone across the country to start a new life doing whatever. I mean, if not for the Oedipal murderous Norman Bates, she was a woman taking life into her own hands. And it also shows
do you think by the nature of, do you think that Hitchcock at all was making a commentary on, look what happens when you women get these ideas and take your life into your own hands?
Well, two things. I don't think anybody would ever really accuse Alfred Hitchcock of being a feminist. And I don't think when you're criticizing a film, it's necessary to suss out the internal motivations of the creator. I think it's okay to just look at the product or the outcome and make your own interpretations. I don't know what Alfred Hitchcock was thinking. What I do know is that Marion Crane, for the time, was a woman atypical of film. She didn't have a man with her. She didn't need one. And it did show sort of in the way that, witch movies are always punishing women for their sexuality. It shows, yes, this is what society does to women who take agency. It murders them. Well,
I think that's a perfect segue into my first film that I wanted to talk about a little bit, which is Jennifer's Body.
Oh, great.
The 2009 dark horror comedy directed by Karen Kusma and written by Diablo Cody. So it basically is a film about a high school student named Jennifer, played by Megan Fox, who gets possessed and starts to kill and eat her male classmates.
Yeah.
So
that's quite a log line.
Why is this a feminist horror film?
First off, I just want to give a quick shout out to Karen Kusma, directed one of my favorite slow burns, The Invitation, from 2015. We watched that together and loved it. She's a real star.
Yeah.
But sorry.
No, that's okay. So why is this a feminist horror? So we discussed in our possession episode how she was sacrificed against her will.
Yeah.
She was, it's essentially it depicts a gang rape of her soul.
Yeah. Completely
she's
non-consensual.
A virgin, although she knows how to use her sexuality. She is actually a virgin character. And the film in itself offers sort of a retaliatory view of when women are raped and where sexuality becomes a strength.
And the fact that it is Megan Fox playing a character who is a virgin also uncomfortably challenges the audience's preconceptions.
Yeah.
Because you look at someone as beautiful as Megan Fox and you think there's no possible way you could be a virgin. And then you have to ask yourself, why are you thinking that?
Well, the female allure is subverted here.
Yes.
And it's used against the male audience.
It does point
both
the camera
by Megan Fox as the character, but as Jennifer as using her sexuality to take revenge on the gender that did her wrong.
Now, it's a legit good movie that didn't do very well, and I think that is the reason.
I think it has a cult following,
It definitely does.
Post, its debut.
I think it's tough for a film to find financial success when it's telling a large part of the audience, take a look at yourselves, you pigs.
The other aspect of this film that I think is also necessary to understand is that there is another female lead, and her name in the film is Needy. And Needy represents the unthreatening woman, the one that doesn't challenge limits, played by Amanda Seyfried.
Yeah.
And she doesn't, this is the type of woman that doesn't exert her power over men or use her sexuality as a weapon. And Needy sees Jennifer as her approach, using her sexuality as wrong. And also, is a call out to the more conservative female view on feminism.
Mm-hmm.
And so she's not a threat. She doesn't present herself as like a monstrous female like Jennifer becomes, that monstrous succubus. And then from society's perception, it's almost like Diablo Cody is saying there's really no right way to be a feminist. And so you can either use your power to allure, or you can use like a level-headed brain to, challenge things that happen.
Absolutely.
Jennifer ends up being killed and Needy ends up in a mental institution. So again, this is like a real commentary on what approach of feminism is correct. There isn't really one.
It's not monolithic. And like all beliefs, it tends to be viewed that way. But, one of you touch on this with Jennifer's Body. One of the most pervasive fears of men, throughout literature and culture is female sexuality. It's essentially the witch trials and craze. You
like
see that
the word beguiling.
Yeah. And, the expression of sexuality, you see that in beautifully done in films like Ken Russell's The Devils, in the more recent Titane, in Andrei Zulawski's Possession, in Jonathan Glazer's In My Skin with Scarlett Johansson. Just expressions of female sexuality that are literal horrors because, throughout history, for some fucking reason, female sexuality and expressions of female sexuality has been viewed as demonic or infernal, or, it couldn't possibly be my sweet little girl that has sexual urges. She must be possessed by a demon. Mm-hmm. Because women don't have sexual urges, I guess. I don't know. But you see that pop up a lot. And how that plays into feminist horror is the subversion of that very, very, very old trope. So in films like Jonathan Glazer's In My Skin, you have this almost anti-feminine alien in the skin of Scarlett Johansson, who is arguably one of the more beautiful actors working today. I mean, she's a stunningly beautiful woman, seducing and quote unquote murdering these men in such a cold, clinical, and calculating alien way. It has all of the visual aesthetics of female sexuality, none of the passion, none of the emotion, none of the heart, and it creates an incredibly disturbing divide when you're watching that. It's like, I guess, like a robot almost, but also there are elements of the movie that are utterly cosmically horrifying on a fucking mind-blowing level. It's a great movie. Everyone should watch it. Under the Skin by Jonathan Glazer. So, but you're starting to see the subversion of female sexuality. In that way, it's more like, okay, you think we're dangerous? Fuck yeah, we are. We're gonna put you in weird alien containment chambers and feed on you.
Yeah.
You've got movies like Shivers and Rabid, done by David Cronenberg. Crash. I mean, honestly, very few directors have explored sexuality and the power of sexuality more than David Cronenberg. But, movies where women have sexual urges that are far outside of what is considered, normal by society, and where these urges are acted upon and practiced and pursued, and they're not suppressed.
Yeah. Well, I want to pivot a little bit to other types of oppression of the feminine. In A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night.
Oh, yeah.
From 2014, directed by Anna Lily Amanpour.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Iranian film.
Yeah. So it's
Iranian.
essentially a female fantasy. I
think it was described as the first ever Iranian vampire movie.
Yeah. So a lonely vampire named Vand. She's the every woman. She represents the every woman. In the sense that, she lives and stalks the people of an Iranian ghost town called Bad City. She meets a man, and it's a little bit of a romance. She's a monstrous female, and she has that abnormal sense of loneliness. But what I really want to explore is this film has a social commentary as well. It challenges the Iranian modesty laws for women,
which have, again, recently come very much into the forefront.
Yeah. And so this is a challenge of that, using feminine power to do so. Also, it challenges the idea that women, specifically this vampire female, Vand, she can walk, it's in the title, she can walk and roam this city freely at night
without a man,
alone.
Yeah.
And that is a carnal fear that women have. Women cannot freely walk in any town alone at night and not have either something in their mind that is protecting them.
One of the
sometimes they web keys between their fingers.
Yeah, one of the easiest examples to give to illustrate the difference between the male and the female experience is, what do you think about when you're walking across the parking lot after dark?
Right. Or how do you protect yourself when you have to walk alone at night?
Does the thought of protecting yourself even enter your mind?
Yeah. Do you ever feel the freedom to do so? And this character actually shows that freedom. And
there's
also
there's also the double meaning of you mentioned the morality laws of a woman walking alone without her husband.
Correct.
or patriarch.
Yeah. And this female vampire has a thirst specifically for oppressive men.
No shortage of those.
No, especially in
every country everywhere, honestly.
That's true. Do you want to take a break?
I think that's a great idea.
Okay.
Well, tonight hasn't exactly worked out the way you thought, huh? A beautiful cabin in the woods, a group of your horniest college friends, and a cadre of mass throw killers picking you off one by one. Oops, that last part wasn't supposed to happen, was it? Well, it did. And now all your friends are dead, displayed just for you in increasingly ironic ways. Now it's down to just the killers and you, and girl, your nerves are as razor thin as those razors they keep throwing at you. Why not reach for a can of Final Girl CBD Seltzer? Every can of FG CBD contains just enough CBD to dull the pain of your injuries, numb the rage at being gaslit by all of your male friends who died anyway, and give you that last little boost you need to either make your escape or surrender fully to your animal instincts and butcher your pursuers with a ferocity completely undeserved by the last 90 minutes of characterization. For a little extra push, try one of our Final Girl CBD seltzers with meth. FG CBD SWM. Every can has enough meth to drive you to berserker levels of strength and murder. I mean self-defense. Final Girl CBD Seltzer. Plan for the worst, but always drink the best. This is a fake ad for a fake product on a horror-themed podcast. We do not condone nor endorse the consumption of fictitious drinks to survive your night in hell.
And my husband is allowing me to say we're back.
Goodness gracious. Well, one thing we mentioned earlier that I wanted to touch on a little bit was authenticity. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if I described it well enough. And one of the things I really mean by that is just examine how the characters are behaving. Now, Stephen King talks about this a lot when he talks about his writing process, how his characters inform him as to what they're going to do next, as opposed to the other way around. He doesn't tell his characters what they're going to do. He creates these personalities, and then he allows the personalities to act in a way that logically fits the boundaries he's set for them. Mm-hmm. So what I mean by authenticity is, okay, you're in a summer camp in the woods. Bunch of your friends are dead in increasingly gross ways. So do you arm yourself and barricade your surroundings and prepare for a standoff, or do you take a shower?
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Right.
There are, one movie that I want to touch on.
Women.
Well, one movie I want to touch on that comes so very close to being a real perfect example of a feminist film, but falls short right at the end is The Descent by Neil Marshall.
Yeah.
Man, that's an awesome movie. First off, it's great. It's super scary. It's gory and violent.
Well, the women don't rely on each other.
That's my point. It is basically an all-female cast, but it falls very much into the trope of when you have more than two women together, they are inherently at competition with each other. And throughout this movie, there's a lot of backstabbing and, stuff like that. And they are not cooperating. They're not helping each other. So it falls short a little bit there. But, when I talk about authenticity, I mean, are the characters acting in a way that you would expect a normal person or even yourself to act in that situation? Or is there a masked killer loose and now you think is the perfect time to take a bath with bubbles?
Exactly. I think that one of the most important things to really recognize is just because there's a film with all women in it doesn't mean it's feminist. Exactly.
And just because there is a final girl doesn't make it feminist. I think one of the things that we've noticed become more popular, but I want to start it off with a real OG, Sidney Prescott.
Yeah.
Possibly one of the greatest final girls of all time. She survives the first movie. By the second movie, where she's just straight up putting rounds into the heads of bodies to make sure they're dead.
Yeah.
I mean, she becomes a badass, she reacts to her situation basically how you would think. She's deeply traumatized. She tries to process it by writing, by becoming an author. She also learns badass survival skills. She becomes utterly ruthless and merciless when she is forced to defend herself.
I have to say, though, that the most feminist of all representations of Sidney Prescott is in Scream 5.
Agreed.
Because she is no longer letting this experience define her.
Yes.
That she has her own life. She's a mother and a wife.
And she's completely done fucking around.
Yeah. And she doesn't have time for it because she no longer defines herself by it. With this third one, I believe that's when she became a recluse and did write the book. And it was that's all she did was try to be safe.
That was
try
the
to
processing
protect herself.
Phase. Yeah. No, it's been a real journey for Sydney. And, just her taking of agency and the way that she does things that make sense. She plans. She fights. She knows what's going on. She's not a victim.
Yeah.
She refuses to be. Now, I want to. That leads into a trend that we've seen more and more these days of the quote unquote final girl taking matters into their own hands much earlier, not just running and hiding and using their wits to escape. Because I think we fall into the trope, which is misguided, in my opinion, that women can't physically defend themselves against male antagonists.
Yeah.
So,
May I put my own?
Absolutely.
Forward? So there's a couple of examples of how feminism is empowered in this film, Ready or Not.
Oh, that was
2019.
Absolutely. One of my main examples, Samara Weaving.
Yeah.
Kicks all kinds of ass.
Yeah. So the main character, played by Samara Weaving, she refuses to be a victim. She turns the concept of marrying into a family very violent turn, and she's refuses to assimilate. She will not assimilate to what the family demands of her. It's the deconstruction of the perfect bride trope. It's the eat the rich trope.
Oh,
it's the final girl trope.
It's rebelling against that old money tradition bullshit of like, so you guys just do this horrible thing because you've always done it and that's it?
Well, it's how some women marry into a powerful and rich family. Their role is often meant to be of service to the family and not one of an empowered individual. And in this film, she busts all of that. And there is a article, I'm sorry, I don't have the information as reference, but there is an article that takes you through all of the stages of the wedding dress.
Oh, yeah, film, yeah, because she has it on the entire time.
And how it becomes utilitarian for her.
Mm-hmm.
Once it's a object of meaning at the beginning, but then it becomes utilitarian. Like when she gets shot through the hand, she rips it off and wraps it.
Yeah.
You know, she... instinctually,
it's almost like a Rambo thing where she's like gearing up.
Yeah,
but she's using every part of it.
She instinctually puts those Converse sneakers on.
Yep.
Like right at the beginning.
Quite a change from watching Dana Winter in the original Invasion of the Body Snatchers running in like a pearl necklace and high heels.
Yeah, right.
You know, nothing against Dana Winter, but it is much more authentic to believe that if you are, regardless of your gender or sexual identity or gender identity, if you are trapped alone with killers and you want to live, you're going to fight to do so.
Yeah,
every
exactly.
living thing fights to survive. So you know, we before Ready or Not, actually several years before that, we saw another example in Sharni Vincent's Erin from You're Next, which directed by Adam Wingard, who rules. Basically, another female character, shit's going on around, and she just refuses to allow her story to be told for her. She fights back, and she fights back viciously.
Yep.
And it's one of my favorite things to see in horror movies is when a quote-unquote regular person gives into their sort of inherent barbarity to survive. You know, when you see someone who like has
like
never
you always had it in you.
Yes. Yeah. And
or
and
you're,
you're
conjuring almost like your inherent witch self. You are conjuring all of the anger and power of all of the feminine energy before you and using it to battle what's in front of you.
Well, let's talk about I think that's a pretty decent segue to one of the most pervasive, not just tropes, but elements of being a woman in reality and in film is not being believed.
Right.
Not
the gaslighting.
Being listened to. Not just gaslighting, but like just no one listening to you. I mean, I think nowhere is that more pronounced than in Nightmare on Elm Street, where like,
oh yeah,
literally
her own dad, who is the fucking chief of police.
Yeah, and her mom who drugs her with barbiturates to like make her go to sleep. You know, that's pretty bad. But you know, we see it in films like the more recent Chloe Okuno's Watcher with Micah Monroe, where she's her fiance doesn't believe her, the cops don't believe her, the neighbors, her friends, no one believes her.
I feel even as an audience member, we might not have believed her for
Chloe
a while.
Okuno, oh my God, I can't believe that was a debut feature, because she does skirt that line a little bit, where there were moments in that movie where I was like, I don't know. Am I watching her deteriorate?
Is she just lonely?
Yeah, because, you know,
and bored?
to compare it to an older film, Repulsion, by the very shitty person Roman Polanski, that was about a woman who had a vibrant social life and was a seemingly normal person who, over the period of, I can't remember, but not very long, becomes a recluse and just loses her mind. The whole movie is basically her slowly deteriorating to the point where she murders a guy and kills a bunny.
Do you have more gaslighting?
Absolutely. I mean, it's all over. So I think it's pretty common in a lot of horror movies, especially the more fantastical supernatural ones, for the main character or the first person to see what's happening to not be believed. Like, you know, you run to the teacher or the cops and you're like, zombies and ghouls, and they're like, what? That makes sense. But when we're talking about women not being believed, it is pervasive. It is, you know, evidence is piling up and people are contorting themselves mentally to avoid believing the woman telling them, like, no, it's a fucking ghost. I'm telling you it's a ghost. And we see that. It's so sad because you see that happening with husbands, with confidants, with friends, and that further isolates the character, and it creates a sense of, like, not only am I alone, but I'm fighting against the people that should be my allies in this. And that's something that we don't typically see from male points of view because it doesn't really happen to men that much.
Right. And I think part of it is, you know, the emergence of the Me Too movement is coming from that core not being believed.
And the absolute rage that can induce, but also, if allowed to fester, the resentment and the bitterness that can grow from never being listened to, never being believed.
The anger and the need for revenge.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
One of those I do want to talk about that sort of goes into this a little bit is Midsommar.
Oh,
I
have a lot to say, and I'm glad you brought that up because, yes, let's talk about Midsommar.
At its core, the film is about unhealthy relationships, grief, mental illness, and, you know, a cult. Christian, the boyfriend character, Jack Rayner, is essentially gaslighting his girlfriend, Danny, played by Florence Pugh, the entire beginning of the movie in order to get her to break up with him.
It is hard
because he's
to
weak
watch.
and
yes.
he doesn't want to hurt her because her sister just killed herself and her parents.
He's also one of those men that has convinced himself he's a good guy, meaning I don't break up with grieving girls. I'm there for them, but he's not. He treats her like shit, and he's dismissive, and he's a prick, and he wants her to dump him so he can maintain the status of, I'm a good guy.
I'm a good guy, and I would never break up with her.
Yeah, which is way worse than actually
Danny
just pulling the Band-Aid off.
Danny is a problematic character at the beginning, too, as, you know, she is grieving, but she's also super codependent on this relationship. She thinks it's a beautiful relationship worth saving. She's always apologizing, too.
Yeah.
And this highlights, in a really, I think, effective way, the microaggressions of misogyny that systematic sexism portrays in relationships within a patriarchal society.
It's death by 1,000 cuts.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a slow wearing down of the psyche and of the soul and of the sense of self, so that by the time if you even realize you're a victim of it, you don't have the strength to fight. You've been sapped of that. It's almost like you've been exsanguinated. The
film sort of delves into all these arrogant men and, you know, having their way with the fairer sex, and then these vicious cult members who are, you know, doing very violent and grotesque things for gods. But, you know, she as a woman and the woman within the women within their cult, they do use their sexual power for something greater, for the greater good, as the, sacrifices necessary for the god, and for this May fair. What's it called? May festival?
The May Queen.
May Queen.
Yeah.
And in like earthly sexuality, like the idea of the earth mother, and taking back that power and control over, the harvest, and having good tidings, and, all of those sort of very old ideals. It really is a Mother Earth story, becoming a Mother Earth story.
Absolutely. I struggled with this one, to be honest, because I wondered if Dani had the agency we think she did, because at the beginning of the movie, there's that tapestry that basically lays out the entire movie. So much of what happens is orchestrated. The special drink that's given to
she's drugged.
the love potion. No, I'm not talking about the mushroom trip. I'm talking about the menstrual blood love potion that they give to Jack Rayner.
Yeah.
The way that they're manipulated and led. However, it made me, it reminded me of the Christian concept of free will. Always was one that I struggled with, because, and my theology teachers just loved me in Catholic school for asking this question over and over again. Do we have actual free will if God knows all potential futures and outcomes? If everything is predestined, isn't free will just sort of a thing you tell us we have so we don't get upset? Like taking your shoes off at the airport? How can you have free will if destiny exists? So yeah. I struggled with that a little bit, but then I thought of two key moments in the movie that I don't think could have been predicted. Now, Dani insists on accompanying them on this trip to Sweden. And that is not only something that the American boys don't want to happen, but their Swedish guide was not counting on. Mm-hmm. He did not invite her, and he is welcoming, but you can tell it throws him off a little bit. Like, okay. Very early on, he notices, like, oh my goodness, you're different. You're special. You were brought here, which again is like,
Yeah, to your point though, she perseveres through all of these quote unquote challenges.
Yes.
Of this cult. So she goes despite this. She takes the mushrooms and, has a sort of emotional purging despite what she was afraid to do all along. She wins the, May Queen games.
Yeah, around the
maypole. And then she ultimately decides to sacrifice
the other
Christian.
Moment. She is given the choice of Christian's fate. And by the way, the fact that his name is Christian, right, and he's sacrificed by pagans is fucking just the cherry on top. But she is given the choice. Spare him or sacrifice him. And she chooses to sacrifice him. Mm-hmm. And that decision, for me, sealed the deal of, okay. There are elements of manipulation, of predetermination, of trying to set things in motion. But Dani was always the wild card. And she does make the decisions in this movie. She does drive the forward motion. And in doing so, becomes the new May Queen.
And that's what I mean by an Earth Mother. Because this isn't... I don't really see Dani as making these decisions as much as these are the only decisions that can be made by her.
Well, I mean, she could have chosen to spare Christian.
Yeah, but I don't think that is... I think that the power of what she was drawn to, that was being drawn out of her and pulled out of her, was something, they have... gods represent this, but I think it was more about like being part of, when she was tripping on mushrooms, she was very connected to the physical earth.
Certainly.
When she purged all of her grief and pain and everything, she was very connected to the earth.
And you get that sense, that's kind of my point is this a feminist movie, or is Danny just a victim of a plaything of God's? Is she a victim of destiny? Was this always going to happen?
I think that it can be an argument for whether or not it's a feminist film or if it can be seen through a feminist lens.
That's interesting.
I don't think it needs to be called a feminist film as much as if you look at it from a feminist point of view, then you can see these pockets. I mean, it is created and, directed by a man, written by a man. So maybe those ideas weren't fully thought out, but I do think if you put your feminism glasses on, that you'll be able to see more about the feminism within the film.
Absolutely. I mean, the agency of the female characters, their importance to the story, and the fact that it is a largely matriarchal society that exists in this commune. Speaking of Ari Aster, I think this transitions into another theme that you wanted to talk about in terms of feminism, which is motherhood.
Yes.
Now, motherhood, as we are, in our modern American Hallmark society, it has a positive connotation. Mom's great. Love mom. Mother's Day. Moms are the best. Moms are, whatever. That is not a universal experience. No. Nowhere is that, I think, probably better illustrated than in Ari Aster's debut film, Hereditary, where we have several examples of toxic motherhood. We've got Toni Collette's departed mother, who seemingly only had children in order to create spare vessels for Paimon, the Archlord of Hell. Mm-hmm. Great job, Mom. And then we've got Toni Collette, who throughout the course of this movie loses one child to an accident, accidentally burns her husband alive, becomes possessed, loses her other child to the Archlord of Hell, and in between all of that is basically a screaming, abusive nightmare of untreated grief and psychosis, ruining the lives of everyone around her because she is so filled with pain, it practically radiates off of her. Mm-hmm. And that's not the stability most kids look for in a mom. Another example that I wanted to bring up. Well, did you?
I do.
Yes.
I have an example of not a toxic mother.
Oh, okay. Because I've got one with both.
But one that is a struggling mom. The Babadook,
yes.
2014.
Yes.
Directed by Jennifer Kent.
Mm.
It's about Amelia, played by Essie Davis, whose young son Samuel has violent and frequent temper tantrums. And as she struggles to deal with his behavior, she can't sleep. She can't deal with any normalcy.
And she also loses her temper.
She does. She sees herself as a monster because she can't connect with her son.
She
can't fix her son.
Is
she
incredibly
can't help her
difficult.
Son. Yes.
Yeah.
This is the only job that she has as a mother is to care for and protect her son, which she cannot do.
Yeah.
And the film, I think, one of the specific elements that really shows her fear and anxiety manifesting itself over the desperate need to be a good mother is the toothache. Her toothache.
Yeah.
And
because it never quite goes away.
She's also grieving.
Mm-hmm.
She's a recent widow. Then she loses her grip on reality. And I think this film really explores, and I did read that the director, Jennifer Kent, did say specifically that she wanted to highlight motherhood as it's not always a natural thing.
Yes.
A lot of people say, "Oh, don't worry." Like when you have a baby,
you'll
don't
figure
worry,
it
you'll
out.
figure it out. You'll just bond with your child automatically,
like
or
fucking
you'll know what to do.
Glenda the Good Witch is going to come down, sprinkle some mother dust on you, and all is illuminated.
And this really explores that idea that it's not always a natural thing. That it is a difficult struggle to be a good mother, and that sometimes you need to create something to help, or sometimes you don't ever become a good mother.
Well, I mean,
or what you think you're doing is the only way you can be a good mother.
I thought that was pretty well explored in We Need to Talk About Kevin, in which Tilda Swinton, from the moment of conception, feels zero connection to her child. And it's left you wondering, how did that affect the kid, knowing that his own mother never loved him?
Right.
Always looked at him sort of like a creature that had come into her life that she was forced to raise, to horrible effect.
One of the other films, though, Darren Aronofsky's Mother, it really puts the like men's ability to rationalize and like problem solve against females' tendency towards irrational or emotional behaviors against each other. Like that is a constant fight within that film. And Veronica, played by Jennifer Lawrence, is the wife and is pregnant with she and her husband's first child. And, you know, throughout the film, her husband lets in all of these guests that claim to be fans of his writing. And one of the guests, it starts to like close in on her because it starts small, but then manifests into all these guests who overwhelm and overtake the home and become violent and ruin her solitude. And she is a vulnerable state. She's pregnant. She tells her husband to get them to leave. And he's basically like, what? Everything's fine. As she continues to spiral downward. And, you know, we are taken along on that ride.
I mean, imagine how terrifying that is to look at the one person who has vowed to believe you and they don't.
Yeah. And they're all there for him, in support of him. So it's almost like his ego is blowing up while her vulnerability is increasing. And there's a scene in the film where Darren Aronofsky almost takes us on a perspective from her walking through her home and down the stairs with all of these people crowding in, and she has no solitude. She has no safety. And she's fearing on holding her stomach. It's really a lot, especially for somebody, if you're watching it and you feel like, if you've been a woman and you've ridden the subway, a crowded subway, and you feel, you know, people are touching you or rubbing up against you, and you never really know, is it intentional or because it's crowded? This sort of has that claustrophobic, female, vulnerable deer in headlights.
You know, I have an example that shows, I think, several different sides of motherhood. It is 2007's Inside, a French film by Julian Maury and Andre Bustillo. Now, warning, this is a very gory film, and it's really tough to watch. But basically, you've got Alison Paradis, who is Vanessa Paradis' younger sister. She is pregnant and just about to give birth, and her fiancé just died in an accident, and she does not want to have this child. It's Christmas. She's very sad. She's like, what am I going to do? And Beatrice Dahl, who, you know, in real life is quite a character herself and is a absolute force of nature in everything she does, plays this crazed nurse who sort of overhears that Sarah, played by Alison Paradis, doesn't want to have the kid. So she breaks into her house at night to take the baby, which, by the way, is still inside. So that follows a sort of cat and mouse. It gets very graphic as she is stalking this woman that she does not believe deserves to be a mother. So a couple of things happen. You've got the reluctant motherhood that is, you know, I have this human growing inside of me and I don't want it. Throughout the film, Alison Paradis' Sarah, she, that motherhood instinct kicks in and she will do anything to protect her child and herself. And she realizes, you know, that it was her grief and her sadness and her confusion, but she wants this child and she wants to live. You've got Beatrice Dahl's character, who's only known as La Femme in this movie, the woman. She has no name, and she is by the way, her performance is unfucking believable in this movie. She's just a hurricane. So she truly believes that this woman is being a gift. It's obscene that she's being this gift of life that she doesn't even want. Mm-hmm. And Beatrice Stahl can't have her own child or lost. It's been a while, but, so you get that sense of like how women judge other women, how women are always commenting on other women's mothering practices. That drives me fucking crazy. Like, you know what? Look at your own shitty kids, okay? They're not so great.
Right.
It seems like there's a particular type of mother that is always got something to say. I think we call them mothers-in-law, but they've always got something to say about how you're raising your kids or what you're doing. And this is that taken to the horror extreme.
Yeah.
Now, Inside is, again, trigger warning, it's part of the French New Extreme movement of the 2000s. But damn, it is so good. And it really shows several different sides of motherhood that you're not going to find on a greeting card on Mother's Day.
I wanted to sort of start to wrap things up
That
with some examples of female empowerment and ways to empower female in books. A couple of book examples. So the first book that I want to mention is a book called Riddance, and it's by Shelley Jackson from 2018. Not to be confused with Shirley Jackson, no relation.
Yes.
Shelley Jackson is a Filipino author. So this book essentially is about a young girl, Jane, who has a debilitating stutter, and she's brought to a vocational school that specializes in the field of necrophysics.
What?
Which is a branch of biophysics that intends to activate the nervous system to stimulate the brain to change habits and open communication.
Okay.
And then the school itself...
That's not what I was thinking when you said necrophysics.
I know.
I was like, zombie scientists?
And the school is designed to teach their students to communicate with the dead. So the headmistress of the school has taken control of her own stutter, and she uses it as a tool in order to communicate with the dead. The book itself is a combination of accounts and both from the past and present. This school is founded in 1890, so there's accounts from ghosts, there's accounts from former children that live there, from the headmistress and her experience. And in this way, she empowers her female students to use their wit and strength in order to persevere through their gifts. The headmistress's name is Sybil.
I mean, it really gives new meaning to he thrusts his fists against the posts and still insists he sees the ghosts.
Yeah. The name of the school is Sybil Jones Vocational School for Ghost Speakers and Hearing Mouth Children.
How are you supposed to say that with a stutter? That's just mean.
But she does. She quite literally rises from the ashes of her childhood, her own childhood, and creates her own science and a school, allowing the dead to speak through children with speech impediments, just like her own.
Cool.
And every major enemy, and this is really where the feminist piece starts to emerge, is every enemy of the school. So a child ends up missing, and so then that brings in the law and all the community, and every enemy of the school is male. There's a doctor who discovers ectoplasm is like a drug that is similar to opium and he tests it on the children there.
Yikes.
To the law, who come in and, start asking questions and challenging, the livelihood of these children that are there.
Wow. That sounds cool.
Yeah. And then the other book that I wanted to mention is called Her Body and Other Parties. And it's by Carmen Maria Machado. It's a collection of short stories, and it mostly centers around violence that female bodies experience and through the eyes of the women experiencing it. every story within the collection has some kind of bodily violence. There's a story called Inventory, where a woman reflects on all of her sexual experiences. And there's a virus. Meanwhile, there's a virus threatening to wipe out humanity while she's reflecting on the good, the bad, and the ugly of all of her sexual experiences. There's a story called Difficult at Parties, where a woman experiences sexual trauma and trying to take control of her sex life. With her partner, she can hear all the internal thoughts of the actors in porn films.
Oh, God.
Yes, all of them.
Stay hard.
Mm-hmm. Or whatever.
Don't go away.
I gotta pick up the groceries later. Yeah.
Cool.
The one of
that's always been missing from porno for me is, what are they thinking?
The first in the collection is called The Husband Stitch, and it's a story about stories, like, because it does talk about the folklore. And I don't know if you'll remember this, but when I was a kid, this is one of the ghost stories that was sort of told to us. It's the narrator of this story meets a boy when she's a teenager, and they fall in love, and they're very happy. But the husband can't let go of the fact that his wife was born with a green ribbon around her neck.
I feel like I remember when you were reading this.
Well, this is an old folklore too.
Yeah.
Sometimes he tries to touch the ribbon. Sometimes he sneaks it. Other times he tries to make her feel guilty about it. And at its core, it refers to the medical procedure called the husband stitch, which has been denied as existing, but typically after childbirth, a woman is given an extra stitch so that her vagina is more pleasurable to her male partner post, vaginal birth. So it's a really interesting story how it takes, from my reading perspective anyway, how it takes this sort of folklore of, this is part of me, the ribbon does not come off, don't touch it, it's just who I am. And then also this procedure that is known as the husband stitch.
Well, and also the fact that, why the husband keeps insisting on the one thing he's been asked not to do.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like he needs it. That's the only thing he needs now.
Why?
And then the last story in the book that I want to talk about is called 8 Bites. And this is where a woman has irreversible surgery for weight loss. She gets gastro bypass surgery, and it has really detrimental spiritual effects on her. She is constantly thinking about her lost parts and feels, less of a woman, less of herself. And it really shows the damage that women do to their own bodies. Women do in general. Society pressures women to do, and that they do to their own bodies. So it's really a great collection of short stories to understand the violence of the feminine and ways in which women have found strength through those experiences.
That sounds awesome.
I mean, it's not a happy collection of short stories.
Oh, is this not a happy subject we're touching on? Before we wrap up, I wanted to say that, like anything, this is our subjective interpretation, and one person may view this is just one critical lens through which to view culture. You can view culture through any number of critical lenses. Feminism is one of them. Not everything has to be feminist to be a good movie, to be enjoyable, but sometimes it's interesting to view even non-feminist movies or those considered that way through this lens to see how it fits. So like anything else, these are our opinions, there are observations, and yours may differ. But That being said, if you want some just quick examples of some things to check out, some female-led horror. Oh, you know what? Before I do that, I just wanted to give a brief shout out to the OG, in my opinion, badass female horror character, and that is Elsa Lanchester's Bride of Frankenstein from 1935 in James Whale's Bride of Frankenstein. Now, the reason I bring that up is she doesn't appear until quite late into the film. She is created by a male scientist to serve as the companion of a male monster created by that scientist. Mm-hmm. So the Bride of Frankenstein is brought into existence to essentially be a slave, has no agency or consent, no choice in the matter, and her first action upon attaining consciousness is to reject the one thing she was created to do. She's essentially Lilith. She's the, from the part of the Bible King James cut out. She is created by man to serve man.
Yep.
And her first act of life is to say, fuck no, I'm not doing any of that. And she screams at the sight, and it causes the monster to go nuts and burn the place down. But it was such a rejection of the hubristic tendency of man to act not only as God, but as like pervert God. Of like, look, I made you a sex toy.
It also has a commentary on the role of the feminine in marriage and what that means.
And this was the 30s, y'all.
Yeah.
Should be noted that James Whale was quite famously gay and suffered greatly in his career because of that when that came out. But this was quite a statement on female agency and empowerment, that her only act in life was to reject her purpose, quote unquote, for being, is to say, no, I'm no one's slave.
Well, I'm first woman.
Yeah.
Not also, first wife or mother.
Not that this is important, but one of the greatest hairstyles of any movie is fucking amazing. So just some quick examples if you want to watch some really good female-led horror. I know I mentioned The Descent earlier. It's just a badass movie. Black Christmas.
Yeah,
is a really good example.
We did talk about that on our other episodes, but yes, absolutely. Some
more recent films like Relic and The Wicked and the Darkness also examine aging, but it's largely female led. And then going back to the 60s, Wait Until Dark, watching a newly blinded Audrey Hepburn being terrorized by a young Alan Arkin and a young Richard Crenna. It's a woman who is being taken advantage of because she's, by all accounts, helpless. Not only is she blind, but she's, little tiny Audrey Hepburn, and she takes care of things in this movie.
And we have done a remake of Suspiria, so obviously there are feminist elements in both of those films, more so I would argue in the more contemporary version.
Dario Argento's always skirted the line there. He features a lot of women in his films, but he murders most of them.
Yes.
So, yeah, two schools of thought there.
But whatever your interests are, wherever they lie, hopefully you can open your eyes a little bit more to the experience of the female.
Yeah, I mean,
not just in horror, but in film in general. See how women are portrayed, typically get a better understanding of what is a positive view, what is a feminist view.
These days we're all craving, I think, authenticity. And that extends to the culture we consume. So, having more, we talked about the films, but regardless of the subject of the film, I think it's vitally important to have on any production, a diverse cast and crew, bringing different perspectives, different voices, different points of view, and catching things that a homogenous crew might miss, because if you have 20 people that have all lived basically the same experience, they might not notice something that someone who's had a different life experience would notice immediately. And it just makes for better filmmaking, better storytelling.
Well, I think that we did a pretty even discussion about both male and female driven films here, but it is really a call to experience more female driven stories. And, there are stories to be told. And sometimes, though, when it is a primarily female run cast or creator film, acted film, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a feminist take.
Absolutely.
But think about your lens. Think about what feminism
please don't simplify
means
it to
you, what you identify as feminist, and, put those glasses on when you're watching all works of art.
Yeah, I mean, Catherine Bigelow directed The Hurt Locker. I wouldn't exactly call that a feminist film.
No.
But, what we're talking about is more thematic, more...
Unless it was about, like, the vagina.
That's a different Hurt Locker.
Yeah.
Once a month. But, well, that about wraps it up for us. I hope you enjoyed this topic.
I'm sure you did.
Yeah, why wouldn't you? I mean, it's a big one, and we definitely barely scratched the surface. But I think...
if you didn't enjoy this, then you're sexist.
Exactly. And canceled.
No, but we thank you always for joining us, and see you next time.
Bye, everybody.
Terror in Tandem is written, produced, and recorded by Laura and Richard Mathiasen, and edited and mixed by Richard Mathiasen. Our theme was written and performed by Carrie Denver, and all other music was written and performed by David Hispanic. All opinions expressed on this podcast are our own and should be taken as such. Thanks for listening, and please remember to give us a like, a review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. See you next time. We're